Welcome to the Sisterhood of Sweat. I am here today with Dr. William Shu. After 20 years of a distinguished career as an endocrinologist at Harvard's Joslin Diabetes Center, Dr. William Shu joined L-Nutra in 2019 as Chief Medical Officer. In this role, Dr. Shu leads the clinical development effort at L-Nutra, oversees the medical affairs department, and advances the education and adaptation of fasting and fasting mimicking diet as an innovative tool to extend human health span. Among his prior roles, he served as vice president at Joslin Diabetes Center, a teaching affiliate of Harvard Medical School, responsible for its international education and healthcare advisory programs. He served on multiple national level professional committees, including the American Diabetes Association, setting national standards of medical care in diabetes. His previous research interests focused on the pathophysiology of diabetes. Let me spit that out. And the application of digital technology in chronic care. Dr. Shu went to Cornell University for college and received his medical degree from Mount Sinai School of Medicine. He completed his internal medicine residency training at Yale School of Medicine and completed his fellowship training in endocrinology and metabolism at Harvard Medical School. He was an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. Today was so good. We talked about what is intermittent fasting, what is prolonged fasting. We talked about various types of fasting, such as alternating days, and we really dove into why you should fast, what the benefits of fasting are, why it speeds up the metabolism versus when you're eating only about 500 calories, which could slow the metabolism if you were doing that long term. We really get into the science of that, how fasting could help you lose weight, the different types of fasting, what should we prepare to fast? Should we taper off after we fast or jump back in? Is it okay to exercise while I'm fasting? And if I'm fasting in the morning, can I still have my coffee or tea? I know you guys all want to know about that. And we just talked about the benefits overall and longevity of certain foods that we could eat, living to 100 in a healthy way with a quality of health. And just so many things about fasting. Fasting is one of the most researched topics, one of the most popular topics right now. And I would say when you're in menopause, I have found it to be a really good tool to really clean the body out and get it working in the proper direction to help you burn through your fat stores. This was so good today. It was a different, I've done a lot of fasting episodes, but this was really a different take on fasting. I really enjoyed it. And Dr. Shu has a sense of humor, so I enjoyed him today. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode with Dr. William Shu. I am excited to welcome Dr. William Shu to the Sisterhood of Sweat today. Welcome, Doctor.
Hey, Linda, thank you so much for inviting me into your studio.
And you're here with an audience of women that like to look great, feel great, be healthy. They're concerned about their health. They really like to hear why they're doing something, what they're going to get out of it, and how to go about it. And I know you have the science and the studies and so much good information for us today. So I am just actually going to let you take it away and start with the topic of what is intermittent fasting and why should we do it?
Well, Linda, I think the wish to look good and to feel good is so universal. And I know that you have lots of listeners that are just really tuning in to get all the pearls that we can get or they can get to feel better and to look better. I think intermittent fasting right now is one of the top, if not the most popular dietary pattern in the United States. If you look at the survey right now, more than 30 million Americans right now, they are embracing some sort of fasting. And now you're right, there are actually several different types of fasting. Intermittent fasting is the most common type. And by that, people really mean when they say intermittent fasting, they really mean fasting done intermittently. And oftentimes is they're talking about what's very specific about something called the time restricted eating or the TRE. And so what TRE is simply, if you look at the 24 hours in a day and you just limit the amount of eating to a specific number of hours. Let's say 8 hours of the entire 24 hours you're eating, that leaves 16 hours when you're fasting. And we call that 16-8, 16 being the fasting hours, 8 hours being the eating hours. And we can imagine that there are many different combinations of eating and fasting hours, right? You could do 12-12, right? 12 hours when the sun rises, you start eating, and when the sun sets, you stop eating, and for the rest of the 12 hours, you just remain fasted. In fact, that's the most ancestral fasting that we've ever seen, right? Before the invention of the electricity, before the invention of the light bulb, people go to bed when the sun goes down, they stop eating, right? And vice versa. When the sun rises, they eat. And that it is also the most what I call circadian fasting, because it's in sync with the body's internal clock. Now,
Yeah.
so I always advocate everybody. You can never say everybody, but almost everybody should get on a 12-12 intermittent fasting regimen because it's relatively easy to do. Think about it. 8 hours. If you wake up in the morning, that means at night after 8 o'clock, you just stop eating. All right. Now, for those of us that need a little bit more push, right? A little high, you have a metabolic goal where you want to lose weight, you want to lose the fat weight, then you could stretch out that fasting period from 12 hours, maybe to 14 hours, maybe to 16 hours. And some people even push it out to 18 hours. But please remember, as you're expanding that fasting hours, that means it's more stress to the body. It's harder to do, but it's going to drive a little bit, greater result if you do it over a period of time. But that also raises the level of challenge. So it's something that the listener should pay attention to.
Is there a difference between, I have read a few studies out there, but what is your take? Is there a difference between a woman doing intermittent fasting or a man? Like, who gets the better results, or are we equal in that regard?
Well, I think that there's a lot of debates out there, and a lot of people feel that it's harder for women to do this, and because the body composition it's slightly different. But I like to take it from a sort of a longer term perspective. Think about fasting. What is fasting? Fasting it's actually an amazing process that has occurred throughout the entire human history, right? In the ancestral times when there was essentially no agriculture, what did people do? People hunted and people gathered, right? During those periods of time, fasting was the norm. And so if you survive, I mean, we're all survivors, think about it. I mean, the fact that we're here on earth today, we've inherited a set of genes that took fasting into the body's mechanism, right? Somehow nature has selected us or our ancestors. And that means we had the building mechanism to be able to adapt to long periods of fasting. And so it's one of those survival mechanisms. And and what does fasting do to the body? It really happens on so many different levels. Linda, maybe I'll take a few minutes to go over the impact of fasting.
Yeah, I mean, like I've read that it boosts our metabolism as well.
Yeah. So it does so many different things, right? So, one of the most common and most obvious benefits is clearly the weight loss. Now, what could be faster for weight loss than fasting, right? You're essentially stopping the food consumption. The body responds to that, and it responds in a very different way than simply a low calorie. If this were simply a low calorie diet, then the body is going to begin to use many of the sources of the body parts for fuel. For example, it's going to tap into your fat components, which is good news, but it also taps into your muscle for
Not good.
source of energy, which is not good, right? But fasting is very different. Fasting is such a stress to the body. The body has to respond to that stress. And so that means that you got growth hormones being pumped up by your body, and that's going to preserve your lean body mass. That's going to preserve your muscle. And that's why fasting, when it's done in a controlled way, it's going to preserve your muscle. It's going to preserve your lean body mass as compared to a low calorie diet done over a long period of time. You're going to lose the lean body mass. You're going to lose muscle. And that is particularly relevant for women, as women's body composition tends to have little less muscle mass. We want to hold on to every hard-earned muscle mass that you can muster, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so while you're preserving that muscle, how does your body sustain itself during fasting? Well, it's going to tap into the fat storage. And particularly, they're going to tap into the fat around the midgut. We also call that,
Perfect.
that's right, that's called the visceral fat. It's not even the love handle. A lot of people think visceral fat is the love handle. It is actually not. It's actually even worse. These are the fat
Oh gosh.
they're inside the belly. They're around your organs. Those are the most metabolic active fats. And we definitely want to burn them first. And nature has so smart, because remember, fasting produces survival mechanisms that when there were not a lot of food around. And so it's going to burn those metabolically active visceral fats first. And it's going to preserve your lean body mass. How is that for a benefit?
Oh, that's amazing. It's an amazing benefit. And I can attest to everything that you're saying, because, when you do a calorie count, cutting, and you get too low, and some of these people, they're doing something like the HCG diet on their 500 calories and still trying to work out and think they're going to preserve muscle. What happens long term is your body thinks it's starving, and then it's like this yo-yo effect
That's
of,
right.
you lose the weight, you gain it back, and then pretty soon your body becomes insulin resistant because of all this dieting and all of this, cutting of the calories way too low.
Yeah.
And what I find fascinating then is that doesn't work so well, but the fasting works so well. And I find in all of my clients, my menopausal women, when they do like a 2-day fast or even longer with some bone broth and some things added in, which you're going to talk today about, that type of thing, adding it in to help you get through the fast.
Yeah.
They really seem to lose what they were getting through menopause as far as belly fat. And I really think it just gives your body a break, a rest, and you can process all the things that are in your liver and all that. Tell us the science on that. Why do menopausal women do so well when they're fasting?
Well, it is a period of time when there's so many changes in the body, right? During the menopausal period, emotionally, things are changing. Body function wise, things are changing. Your hormones are changing. I mean, it's a time of tremendous variability. Think about that, right? It's not a steady period. People think about menopause as like a period, but it's actually a undulating periods of many changes. And think about during that period of time, everything you should be doing, eating better, exercise every day. But the reality is it's so hard to follow, to be committed to a long-term lifestyle changes. If we could do this, then we already wouldn't be here. I mean, everybody would be doing very well and have no way to lose, right? And that is really the irony here. I think many of your listeners, they know what to do, but they can't get to it because there's so many things, so many changes, so much stress outside of their lives. So what fasting does, it smooths this out. It stabilizes many of these variabilities in your life because you're not choosing what to eat. You're not picking, when you should eat it. You're just not
what
eating.
to eat, when to eat it, how much to have.
Exactly. And every day planning it out and shopping, and all that. And so what fasting does, it establishes that stability. It reduces the variability to the body. And so, and what does it do? It taps into what nature has already designed, a time of rejuvenation. So let me use this example here. If you look at, we talk about the weight loss as one of the benefits, but a lot of people do not realize fasting is actually fantastic, for your mental health as well, right? So if you look at, let's say a tiger in the wild, when it's hungry, in between the hunts, what stage does it go through? It's a fasting state. Now, you don't ever see tiger when it's hungry to say lying on her back and say, what, I'm too tired to hunt. I have no energy. I think I'm too depressed to do anything. When it's hungry, it's actually super vigilant, right? It's honing its attention onto the next prey. That's all part of the responses of fasting. It actually heightens our energy level. It produces mental clarity. So think about that. Isn't that something that we want during the perimenopausal period when there's so many disruptions, interruptions, many stresses out there? Fasting clears the mind. And this is also why, if you look at religious practices,
I was going to say biblical, yeah.
Right? Biblical, in fact, every religion has fasting components. Every religion, every culture has some sort of fasting practices. And because it purifies your thoughts, it hones your attention, and you don't have to look too far. Just watch National Geographic, right? When the animals are hungry, they're not in a state of just do nothing. In fact, their minds are alert, and that's the second benefit of fasting. Now, let's tap into a little bit deeper onto the benefit. What about the cells? The cells are fundamental, right? They make up our body, right? And during a fast, especially when it's prolonged fast, and we'll go into that a little bit. What's intermittent fasting versus prolonged fasting? Okay. But during a prolonged fast, there's enough stress in the body where the cell says, hey, I can't grow anymore because I'm not sensing any nutrients coming in. That means it's no longer time to grow bigger or multiply more, but it's actually time to recycle, to cleanse, to get those cellular junks out of the cells. And the process is so important for every living organism. And it's brought on by prolonged fasting. And it's so critical to healthy aging that the scientists that described this process won the Nobel Prize in 2016. And the process is called autophagy. Some people call it autophagy, right? So That means self-eating, cellular self-eating. It's a process essentially basically saying that, hey, the cell senses that there aren't going to be nutrients coming in. So it's actually going to take some of the older and worn out cellular components, some of the mitochondria, some of the lysosomes, a lot of the critical cellular components, and basically say, hey, those are older parts. We should kind of chew it up, use the new components to make new ones. And that cellular cycle is so important to cellular health, and which can be brought on by fasting, by prolonged fasting. And so that's actually the third really important benefits to fasting, is not only for the fat loss, not only for the mental clarity or the energy level, but also there's some deep cellular benefits.
What about, I know for my listeners out there, the very first question I usually get because of the intermittent fasting, they want to know if they're fasting in the morning, can they still have their coffee or tea?
That's such a great, pragmatic question, right? So practical. Coffee is very interesting. Coffee is good for you. There are many studies to show that coffee is great. I mean, there are studies to show that coffee can prevent diabetes, a regular consumption of coffee. But obviously, you have to be careful what you put into the coffee, right?
Yeah, don't load it with sugar and creamer.
Heavy cream, right. So, but coffee itself, I think it's when done in the right amount could be very helpful. And let me explain. A lot of people who are not used to fasting and they drink coffee every day, when they fast without coffee, they get a withdrawal headache. And that just makes fasting very unpleasant.
Difficult. Yes.
That's right. And so I often say, drink no more than a cup of black coffee only. Don't add anything. Don't add artificial sweetener. Don't add sugar. Do not add dairy product in there. Black coffee, and for people who are a little bit more scientific, it's probably less than 140 milligrams of caffeine. I think that's okay. That's almost like 2 cups of green tea or black tea. That still should be acceptable. And the reason why you don't want to drink too much coffee is because coffee can be sensed by these cells to be a nutrient. And so you don't want to give them the signals that there are nutrients there, because then why would the cells go into that cellular rejuvenation, right? They wouldn't go into that mode of cleaning or cellular cleansing if they perceive coffee to be nutrients. And so that amount is critical. We think a cup generally ranges from 90 milligrams to about 140 milligrams of caffeine. I think that's acceptable.
That's perfect. That really answers my question. I do some black tea, some cinnamon tea, because I cut my caffeine down, because it also can spike your insulin levels. When you're drinking too much caffeine, you get that rise, and you don't want the blood sugar crashing and burning when you're fasting either.
Yeah, it is. It can be a double-edged sword, right? When it's too much of a good thing, I mean, the body is very smart. Just give it in moderation, just like everything.
Now, I know that everyone that comes to my gym wants to know, can they exercise while they're fasting? What if they are doing a 2-day fast and it's the prolonged fast and not the intermittent?
That's such a good question too. It's so relevant. It's all, I will say the first concern is obviously safety, right? So for those of your listeners that have never fasted before, they don't know what the impact of fasting is. This is probably not the time you're gonna power bench press, and to the max. I mean, this is probably not the time to do that, right? As you can imagine, it's a simple kind of a safety concern here. Before you know what fasting does to your body, you should go easy. And this is also because during fasting, you're likely to be dehydrated. And so hydration is the key, right? And if you're dehydrated, you go to a gym and you work off a sweat, is probably not a good idea, because you're gonna be even further dehydrated, right? And then number 3, during a prolonged fasting period, it's also not the time to do a lot of extraneous exercise because you're not giving the nitrogen, you're not providing the body with amino acids or protein during that period of time. You don't want to, because if you had done that, then the cells is going to say, oh, it's not fasting, I see nutrients. It's not going to go into that rejuvenation state that we talked a little bit about. On the other hand, if you work out and you tear up your muscles and you're going to need that protein and nitrogen supply, you're not giving it because you're fasting, then your body is in this negative hydrogen balance, which is also not good. And that's why I often say that the best time for exercise is during the refeeding period. Right? So let's say if you have a prolonged period of fasting, that's already enough stress. That's going to cause the cell to rejuvenate. That's wonderful. You don't need to help it. Okay. But what would be a really great time is after you fast. So when it's time to replenish the body, that is when the time you want to eat well, eat plant-based protein, and then that's when you can work out to build up your muscle mass and your strength and your endurance. And so there's timing to everything. And but however, now if you are a really good athlete, let's say you run 5 miles a day, 10 miles a day, if you just cut back, do half of that. Would that hurt you? I don't think so, because you are already trained. You know your body well, and don't push it to the max. Do a sub-max exercise, and I think that's very acceptable as well.
And I do think it's important, like you are fasting and you're giving your body a rest from food. And it would be a wonderful time to give your body a rest from exercise so you could just rejuvenate yourself fully. So that also, I think, what about when we are doing a prolonged fast? Don't you think we should prepare ourselves? We shouldn't be drinking, the night before, tying one on, eating too much junk.
Yeah. Well, there is an ideal answer and there is a pragmatic answer, right? So I mean, ideally, there should not be any time where we kind of let ourselves go loose. But hey, look, everybody wants to enjoy life. This is the holiday season from time to time, right? And I think the pragmatic answer is, for a fasting regimen like the fasting mimicking diet, the prolonged fasting mimicking diet, which we could talk a little bit more about. It is designed for people to go into fasting without having that preparation period. And so, yes, should you prepare? Oh, of course. But can you go into it without preparation? I think, it's like the question, when should I exercise? I mean, a lot of the patients ask me like, Dr. Xu, when should I exercise? I say, well, anytime when you have time, because the reality is you just don't get to it. So whenever you can exercise, I'm happy. Now second level, if you're an expert athlete, and then we can talk about your what kind of chronotypes you are, when is best for your body type. But the first answer is always, hey, if you can exercise, do it regardless of the time.
So then what about we've done the fast and we're ready to come off of the fast? We shouldn't just jump back into everything we had before, should we?
That's actually a really good a point here, because look, fasting is a period where you're doing essentially self-cleansing, right? Your cells are recycling, they're rejuvenating, they're cleaning out all the junk, and they're producing new ones. And it's a stress to the body, right? And so that means you run dry. I mean, for a couple of days, couple of whatever regimen you're on, I mean, for that period of time, you're not getting any nutrients into the body, right? So it is a huge stress. So now after the fasting is complete, you're entering that refeeding cycle. What does that mean? That means your body is so hungry. Not only you physically feel hungry, but all your cells are going to be dying, right? For new fresh of nutrients coming in. That means, guess what? They're going to gobble up everything you put in your mouth. Even the toxins, the herbicides, the pesticides, all the bad stuff. So this is the time when I would say, go organic. This is the time, if you want to spend the money, this is the time to eat clean food, plant-based food. If you need to, go to fish. If you want animal-based protein, this is the time where you should be consuming fish, clean, plant-based food. And critically important, especially the following week after a prolonged fasting. It's so important.
Especially then too, if you are on the whole wanting the added benefit of the weight loss. I think the consideration of preparing yourself for the fast, doing the fast, and then tapering, like when you come back to eating, like start in and build up versus jumping off a cliff and eating donuts and Oreos or whatever.
Linda, I see two different types of people, that I've come across, right? One group is like, wow, this fasting changes my relationship with food, right? Because now for a couple of days, however long the fasting period is, I have given up my favorite addiction, right? And so it changes that network, that connection to the food. And now they say, well, what can I eat now? Because now my body is so clean. I want to continue this. It feels so good. What do I eat now? Right. So there is that school of people. And then there's another school of people who say, my goodness, you know what? I'm so hungry. I want to eat everything, inside. And so you have to be careful, like what type of people you are for our listeners, and really be careful, because that's the time your body is so susceptible. They're so open to whatever food you're putting into the body, and a critical period indeed.
So my 2 cents here would be, from doing all of the nutrition and the competition dieting, is you don't want to rebound. And if you are doing this for health and weight loss, you want to try to prepare yourself when you're going into the fast. You don't want to get sick and feel bad either when you're fasting. It's a little easier if I'm eating clean to go into a fast and to be able to do it. And then afterwards, if I'm wanting that weight loss and I'm feeling great, the worst thing I could do, really, truly, and I can attest to this, is say, okay, I've lost my 8 pounds or whatever it is. I'm just going to eat whatever I want. And then what's going to happen is you're going to rebound real quick, because your body just soaks that up like a sponge. And then you kind of, in a way, I feel, are defeating the purpose of the fast. So work with the fast, prepare yourself, do the fast, and then eat very clean and build yourself up. Don't just jump off the cliff and eat whatever, would be my 2 cents.
Absolutely. I am a pragmatist. I am very pragmatic. I think there are going to be some portion of our listeners right now that struggle with that, right? I mean, but I often use an example to comfort that segment of our population. Okay, so let's say in college. Remember the college days? I mean, we were supposed to be studying every single day, right? After the lectures, we're supposed to study and do homework every day. And so when exam comes, when midterm comes, and final comes, what happens? Oh, I study every day. I know everything. I don't have to cram. But the reality is, if you're like me, I cram. A couple of days before the exams, and I knew that I should be studying every day, but I just didn't. But cramming,
I got you.
Got me through. Right? It did get me through. So fasting is almost like that, right? Even though we should be eating really good every day, we should be exercising, de-stress, we should be sleeping well every day. The reality of living in our society today is very hard to do that every single day. Fasting could be, even if you don't have time to prepare, even if you don't have time to go back to a perfect eating, I still feel like it's cramming. It's that stress causing you to study in college. The stress of fasting, it's going to cause your cells to rejuvenate. It's going to burn your fat. It's still going to do you some good.
I love that. That was good. And a lot of my listeners right now are appreciating that answer, I'm sure. Uh, well, now that leads me to my next question. How often should we be fasting?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in this whole discussion of fasting, a lot of people forget fasting is only one side of the coin. It's really not the fasting alone that does the body a lot of good. It's the fasting and then the nourishment, right? It's the fasting and then the nourishment. It's the repeated cycle. Just think about exercise. How good is exercise? Well, it depends. If you exercise every 20 minutes, intensely for 3 days, you're going to die, right? Think about that, right? It's really exercising and then the rest, allow the body to heal, and then the exercise and then rest, right? So fasting and refeeding is just like the yin and yang of health. So you do have to give body a period to recover. Now, how long do you need to recover? It depends how long you're on a fasting regimen, right? And so while it's intermittent fasting, like a time restrict eating, you could do it almost every day because it's not as stressful. But now if you go for a few days without food, I mean, you really should have a couple of weeks of just, rejuvenation. Now, there is something called 5-2 intermittent fasting or alternate day fasting. That's one day eating, one day not eating, one day eating, one day not eating. To tell you the truth, I think alternate day is really difficult for most of my people. Maybe you have a lot of heroes among your listeners, but alternating one day eating, one day not eating is difficult. Okay,
I would
5-2
think
maybe
that would be hard.
that would be really hard. 5-2 maybe 5-2 means 5 days out of the week you eat regularly, and you pick 2 out of the 5 days where you either don't eat anything or you reduce it down to about 500 to 800 calories on those fasting days. That is a little bit more manageable, right? And so if you do that where you're not linking the fasting days together for a prolonged period of time, then you can do it more frequently. I'll give you one example. The product that we make is called the Fasting Mimicking Diet. And the way it's able to mimic fasting, as the name it implies, is that we give the nutrients below the threshold where the cells are going to recognize them as nutrients. And so we can nourish the body at the same time, keep the body in the fasting state. So this technology was developed at the University of Southern California over the last 20 years with government federal fundings from the National Institutes of Health and from the European Union for the last 20 years. This technology, for example, is a 5-day meal kit. So every day you just eat the food that is included in each of the day box. You don't eat anything else. You just add water to it. Okay. Now, so that 5 days, what happens to your body in the 5 days? The first day, essentially, you're going to use the glycogen in your liver, right? So you're going to burn out the carbohydrate storage in your body. By the second day, you enter into a fat burning mode. That's what we want, right? We begin to use fat as the source of our energy. By second day to third day, that's when that autophagy kicks in. Remember, I mentioned that cellular recycling that won the Nobel Prize? That will happen between 2 to 3 days. And then you continue that cellular cleanse until the fifth day. So for a cycle like this, you would need about 25 days of rest, 25 days of nourishment for this. So essentially what you would do is you would go through a fasting mimicking diet once a month. That's 5 days. And you go back to your normal life for 25 days. And you repeat that cycle for a couple of times, depending on your metabolic goals. And we have studies to show that when you do that, from 3 to 4 cycles, a couple of things happen. Number one, you do achieve that cellular cleanse. Number two, you do lose that abdominal weight, that abdominal fat, and you preserve that lean body mass. Number three, it supports your energy, right? It helps with brain fog. It helps supports your energy. And number four, it changes your relationship, your behavior with food. And so without being in good, I'm going to use the air quote good, on your dietary pattern every single day, just 5 days a month can give you many of the same benefits as an everyday good diet. And so that's an example of how much rest and versus how much fasting you should really balance out.
I like that. That's really good. How does it taste, this
Yeah.
product?
Well, hey, taste is very personal. I think it tastes great. But how do I describe to you? In the fasting mimicking diet, there are bars, there are soups, but they are all scientifically formulated to nourish your body while keep your body in a fasting state. You have to try it. I don't know how to describe it.
Well, I know my clients already were wondering what does it taste like? But I think when you are fasting, you're just happy to have something. And
I'll tell
so,
you cherish the small crackers. I mean, when my wife and I do it, it's funny how we like take the smallest bite possible out of the crackers so we could consume that cracker like over a period of like 10 minutes.
well, it's true. And I tell people, oh, you'll be thinking that's a steak dinner later,
That's right.
because it changes the way you view food.
Yes.
And it's so great. I think it makes all of your natural food taste better when you get back to it. So I really love the idea of the fasting mimicking diet using plant-based food. I think it's somebody should have thought of it sooner. It's excellent. What are the benefits that we can expect to see from following your protocol?
Yeah, I think we mentioned a little bit about the cellular benefits. Let me focus a little bit on the behavior aspect. Sure, you're going to lose weight for sure, right? You're going to feel better. I think that's a given. I think one of the big challenges, as I mentioned, and from the onset of the show, is that it is just difficult to stay on a good diet every single day. Now, every dietitian, every physician, every health authority, every health coach is going to tell you, hey, you got to eat better every day. Yes, I understand, right? We all know that, right? And what's good about fasting through the fasting mimicking diet is that even if you're less than perfect on the days when you're not fasting, at the end of 3 to 4 months, as we have shown in the study, you still see a positive benefits. And guess what? Even if you stop doing fasting for a little while, even 3 months after your last cycles of fasting, you're still going to see very impressive residual effect. And we call that metabolic memory, because the cell has a memory and it's going to try to get back to where you were during that periodic fasting period. And number two is our behavior also change, as you mentioned. If you have done a couple of cycles of fasting mimicking diet where you're changing your relationship with your food for the past 5 days every month, even if you're not fasting, you're going to savor your food in a different way. You're going to appreciate your food in a different way rather than just gobble them down very quickly, right? You're going to say, wow, this tastes good, right? I'm going to cherish this food. And you're going to learn to manage your portion size. And you're going to remember the days when you were fasting, right? And how this is enough. And I often say that the amount of food we can eat till we're not hungry is very different than the amount of food we can eat until we're full. It's a huge difference there, okay? We don't need a lot of food to not feel hungry, but it's going to take a lot more food until we fully feel satiated, okay? And fasting is going to teach you where to stop, right? When to know,
Oh, yeah, I 100% agree with that. That's one of the benefits I really noticed. And I just have to say this, I'm famous for telling my clients, and you really actually echoed it when you said we're using our fat storage when we fast. I just told them, when they say, well, I'll be starving to death. And I'm like, no, you won't be starving. You'll be living off the fat of the land, because basically you have all this excess fat that you're storing that you're going to be able to utilize, because we really probably don't need as much food as we're eating.
And the thing is, because of our 24/7 eating culture, we never tap into the fat reserve, right? We never tap into the fat reserve. And this is really the key here. It's like, if you don't make money for a day, you probably not worry. You say, oh, tomorrow the income will come, right? But what if you don't make money for a week? Then you say, oh, I better switch the account now. I need to, right, transfer the money from one account to another account. But if you don't make money for a month, what would you do? Right? You say, well, I have to change my lifestyle, right? Same thing with the body. When you fast for a short period of time, it's not okay, whatever, right? It doesn't bother you. It doesn't change you. It's not going to change your health.
It's not earth shattering.
It's not sharing. But when you begin to build this stress, when you begin to fast for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, the body says, my goodness, I gotta tap into resources from my fats. And that's when it's the stress that changes the dynamics of our biology. And guess what? 21st century human beings, we need that stress to force our body to tap into these fats, to cause autophagy to happen, to cause the cellular rejuvenation to take place.
That is a great answer. That was so good. I love it. That's probably my favorite segue today. And now I want to ask, because I'll be 60 next year, but what are the foods that we can eat to extend our longevity? And if we do that, how can we increase the odds of living past 100?
Yeah, I mean, this is, seeking the fountain of youth. It has been a humanity's, long-term dream, right? Where every culture is looking for that source. And unfortunately, we have good examples, right? If you look around the blue zone regions of the world, right? In Europe, in Nakiowa, in other places in North America, in certain pockets in California, there are concentrations of folks that live beyond 100 years old, right? And if you look at their lifestyle, you learn a lot. Number one, most of them are plant-based culture. They love their main staples are complex carbohydrates. That grown from the food, that grow from the ground, and lots of complex carbohydrates. Number two, many of them have fish as part of their diet, right? Plenty of fish, and those are the food we're going to eat after a fasting period. Lots of nuts, right? And the Mediterranean type of olive, nuts, and Mediterranean time after time has been voted one of the best diets that shown to support human longevity, right? What do they have? It's fish, it's legumes, vegetables, right? Complex carbohydrates,
Yes.
olives, and nuts. And these
Yes.
are good stuff for our body. And they are central to the body function. The founder of L-Nutra, that's the company that makes the fasting mimicking diet, prolonged fasting mimicking diet. He's a professor at the University of Southern California. He wrote a book called The Longevity Diet. You should check it out.
I love to, yeah.
It takes sort of the resources from the lab, the evidence from the lab. It looks at epidemiologic studies. It looks into the blue zone regions of the world and many other pillars, and try to figure out what made longevity tick. Now, how did people derive better healthy aging approach? And Dr. Walter Longo has put all his research and his wisdom in that longevity diet book. I would highly recommend your listeners, if you're looking for an approach to healthy aging.
I love that. And I think I have actually heard of the book, but I haven't read it. So I would love to check that out, because I feel like we can set ourselves up to win just like all the people that are doing the Mediterranean diet. And they do eat a little less, like their portion sizes are not huge. Uh,
And, and guess
right?
what? Many of them practice some sort of fasting, either intermittent
Uh-huh.
fasting or a prolonged religious fasting.
Yeah, yeah. And I found it interesting along that line that the people that eat less usually live longer. So
Well,
I,
yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we do see that in animals studies when you put these laboratory rats and when you fast them, they live 30% longer. Now, the question whether this is going to translate into humans, can you imagine 30 years longer or 30% longer? I think the jury is still out there, right? But
mhm,
even short of that, what we don't want is simply long life. We want to live
quality.
while healthy,
Yeah,
right? The idea of a health span is the amount of time you live long and healthy. And
yes.
that's what we were searching for. And we know that the approach that we discussed earlier today, the food we talked about today, can support that healthy aging.
This has been so, so good today. And I really, really enjoyed all of your analogies, and you brought it with a little humor, which is always fun. And you're very knowledgeable. I mean, you have extensive knowledge. You've went to Harvard, Cornell. You've just like to me, um, you're well versed in this topic. Where can the listeners find more of your information online?
Yeah, for the company that is behind the technology, the innovative thinking of using food, plant-based food as a solution to support health and wellness, please go to L-Nutra, that's L-Nutra.com. That's the company that's behind all these fascinating research. Now, if you're interested in the fasting mimicking diet as a product for yourself, for your family, you could go to Prolon, PROLONFMD.com. ProlongFMD.com.
And where can everybody follow you?
Well, I think we have a Facebook page called Fastination. Fastination. That's where you can follow much of our exciting discussions.
I love the name. That's perfect. And I just want to thank you so much for coming on our show today and providing so much good information for everybody out there. And I want to ask you one more question. How often do you fast?
I do time restricted eating, and because I don't have a very specific metabolic goal for me, I'm normal weight, so I do 12-12. I think, as I mentioned, everybody should be doing 12-12. But for prolonged fast, the FMD fast, I do it every 3 months.
And what is the main benefit you've seen from it?
It's really the cellular benefits. And for me, I'm doing it for healthy aging.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of the Sisterhood of Sweat. Bye, everyone.